And I reaffirmed within myself that this is part of my spiritual family and a home, a spiritual home for me that I like to return to. One thing about a warrior, been in the field on the line 50 years, the fight for justice is norm. Abnormality is the fight, is being out of the fight. These are the abnormal people. The normal people are in the fight. Now, my subject is education struggle, the highest form of education. Because the next time I be here, I will be speaking on a new reality in education. In education and information, so many people have got us wrong, especially Western sociologists, Western psychiatrists, Western educators in general. A brother went to a psychiatrist and he was telling me the story. And so the white psychiatrist immediately began, as white psychiatrist, but what about your sex life? The sex life is all right. How you get along with your mother? Mama get along, she's such a good thing. Mom's fine. I can hit her for $10 anytime. I love mama. How you get along with your brother and sister? Fine, They come to the family reunions, always bringing presents to my children. They said, then this white psychiatrist said, now what are you crazy about? See, we become, because our education is different, when we are disturbed for different reasons. This is why we have to develop a teacher corps for us and an educational corps for us. And inasmuch as basic Western psychiatry was taken for African witch doctors, as Sigmund Freud admitted, why go to the second grader? Go straight to the witch doctor. Why carbon copies? Go to the original. The brother explained that his sense of being disturbed is that he worked on a job for 10 years. He knew the job and he knew the factory. He could supervise it. He knew how to take it over. Then they hired a young white man who learned under him, who was now his supervisor. He wanted the job, he needed the job, he had a family. So his quandary is that, shall I on principle quit the job, therefore jeopardizing the economy of my own family, or continue in humiliation serving under an inept human being that I had to train? My main point is that because of the nature of our education for reality, even when we are mentally disturbed for reasons other than that of white people. A black man can have a perfect sex life, perfect relationship with his wife and his children, and still be crazy as hell. But whites think that if you can solve the sex business, straighten out whether your mother changed your diapers on time, whether you envy your father for having the beautiful relationship with your mother, if you get hung up in all of that, they figure somewhere your trouble is in that arena. I've said this before. At a meeting in Washington, someone came up to me, and it was a German. It was a meeting on Zionism, and he said sheepishly, almost apologetically, other ethnic groups in the United States has pulled themselves by their own bootstrap. Why haven't your people done the same? And I said, because someone stole our boots. So you can pull yourself up by your own bootstraps without boots, you make a miracle. Now let's go back to struggle, because our education for reality has come out of struggle. Our meaningful education has been a part of a struggle, so therefore if you are educated in the midst of struggle, it holds much better. I am not saying that struggle is essential to education. I'm saying that there's something special about struggle in relationship to education that gives you a concrete education you otherwise would not have. Because when you're educated in struggle, you're educated with a new reality. We as a people in the United States have been miseducated, misnamed, and therefore we suffer the dilemma of assuming that the method of our former slave master can liberate us. When either we liberate ourselves or we're not liberated at all. Education, liberation, is something you take with your own hands. And if someone else hands it to you, that someone else can take it back. We're educated away from our tradition, and this is why we went wrong in the approach to integration. Basically, there's nothing wrong with integration in itself, except when you integrate it into someone else's educational system, you accepted their educational values. And that's the dilemma right now. We don't know how to measure ourselves based on our traditional values. And we went wrong in Africa, and we were wrong in the United States when we assumed that an oppressor can afford to educate us. No one can afford to educate you and how to take that power away from them. Education in the West for whites is education to hold power. And this is the only education that is truly worthwhile. Everything else is a waste of time. Now, I have spoken on this subject in so many different places with so many different types of emphasis based on the audience and based on the need and based on change, that if I had an argument, I've exhausted the argument long ago. I maintain that in a rough-hewed way, we are the most educated people in this country. Our dilemma is that we cannot alter the education that was handed down to us soon enough to make education more relevant to us. We have not examined the great teachers and preachers of the world to find out where they went wrong, mostly in regard to us. Now, I have no problem with Karl Marx's class analysis and his economic analysis. His analysis was appropriate for Europe. It wasn't even appropriate for all of Europe. He was basing it on urban Europe, partly industrialized Europe. And when he prophesied the Russian Revolution, he was dead wrong. Now I'm here to fight Karl Marx, but I'm showing you there's so many things in the world you just swallow and regurgitate without examining it. The major factor in Europe is class and economics. But the major class in the non-Western world is culture and religion. And there's no point of saying that religion is the opiate of the people. They're not going to discard it anyway because they have no other avenue. And neither will the Russians. Only being without God is their new God. They too have spirituality. In one of my last visits to Russia, I had to go up winding stairs to some ceremony, and on one ledge there was Lenin, next there's Engels, next ledge Karl Marx, and the band was playing, putting us in the spirit. And I said, these people are not atheists. They've just changed the name of the saints. St. Karl, St. Engels, St. Lenin. That's all. There's no such thing as a spiritualist people. And when we look at other people's relationship to themselves, we understand that. There are several ethnic groups and several predominantly ethnic nations in Russia right now fighting for the right to exercise their own culture and religion and stay inside of Russia, a formally declared atheist nation, which is the most stupid thing they ever done. Man is a long way from sustaining himself without any form of God. Someone brought me a tape of Reverend Alan Bosak speak to the Baptist Convention. And his analysis was so correct, is that when the European assumes that he can master the oceans, when he can assume that he can rule over everybody else, he is saying there is no God because I am God. Once a student asked me, because I was critical of certain forms of corruption within the church, Mr. Clarke, do you believe in God? I said, when I can make a rose, a tree, stop the ocean from rowing, when I can bring back the seasons, I will say I no longer believe in God, because when I can do that, I will be God. I do not conceive of any person of any religious or political persuasion existing in the world without some form of spirituality. Now, spirituality and religion are supposed to go together, but sometimes they do not. You can have great spirituality and be sympathetic to all of them when they are practiced in the name of the people. Now, because our struggle in the United States, in the Caribbean Islands, and in South America was to look at ourselves through our eyes and through our basic culture and our own spirituality, struggle to do this, struggle against the odds against us, was really a form of education, and might be the highest form of education, because with all of the murder, with all of the change, with all of the control of the images, to survive in this environment is a miracle. I think in our struggle, we have taught this nation a lesson without fully understanding the nature of our teaching. One thing we have failed to recognize, that in the American melting pot, we didn't melt. And that the symbol of the melting pot could well be wrong. Symbolically, I think we should have called ourselves a salad bowl. Because in a salad bowl, the relish don't have to become a tomato, the lettuce don't have to become a cucumber. Yet each one is essential to the salad. Now this is the kind of nation we have. But remember, the nation was not originally designed for you or for anybody other than Protestant white. Once you look at the design of this nation and look at the design of the world beginning in the 15th and the 16th century, a lot of things that look like contradictions are no longer contradictions. If you look at the present campaign for the presidency, not a qualified person up there, you look at quails or quails, a rich dumb bunny, but when you look at his scores in school and look at when he a D plus, a black man couldn't even get a job collecting the garbage with that kind of marks in school. And yet they elect this man who might become president of the United States. Any assassin might make him president of the United States by knocking off the first. There are still doors in this country that open on the presence of whiteness and close on the presence of blackness. You can have all your illusions about the fight is over, we got the laws. But my main point, I keep repeating, can you pass a taxi cab test? You get downtown, throw up your black hand, cab drives you by, sometimes thumbing his nose. That means that you didn't melt in the pot. There were some people in the pot that just wouldn't melt. If you understand the design of the United States, that's still intact, no matter what kind of words they use, this country was designed for free white Protestant males, middle class and up, those who agree with the prevailing status quo and who own property. When they said liberty and justice for all, that was all they were talking about. So if you're clear about that, you will know educationally what you will have to do, and you will know information-wise what you will have to do. There's a continuous struggle of people who've lived under the domination of other people to get back to their real self and their real traditions. We are people taken out of our cultural incubator, placed into someone else's culture incubator, and our soul is rejecting the climate of the incubator. In visiting with a group in Africa, at the end of the session, I remember saying to the group, you never heard the word MF since you've been here? You never heard anybody calling anybody a bitch since you've been here? You haven't seen any children crying? You've seen laughter and beauty and contentment on their faces. They are in the cultural incubator that produced them. They're not in an alien place. And most of our education has been informal, trying to educate us to be contained within a cultural incubator that we didn't create for the first time, in the first place, create for our containment and not our liberation. What we have to do is to go back and look at the struggle to be educated and the dilemma between the Africans in the United States and the Africans in Africa. In spite of slavery, in spite of the devastating effect of Arabs as well as who came before the Europeans, the African in the main was in his cultural incubator. He was spiritually what he was created to be. And inasmuch as he had in his faith and still have all of the elements of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, he is multi-spiritual, because he belongs universally to all of the religions of the world. And when he moves away from these religions to a religion fashioned to contain him, not knowing that these religions were made from elements of his religion in the first place, he's got a problem. And going to an insane asylum in Ghana, every single inmate was Western educated. And what caused his mental problem? The lack of re-entry. He cannot go back into his traditional society and feel at ease. When his traditional society was more socialist than anything Karl Marx ever said, and they did not need any dogma to prove the point. It was socialist by nature. It was socialist by design. You did not ask, am I my brother's keeper? You just kept it. You didn't preach a sisterhood. You just created it and lived it out. In a society that had some of the things that purified itself, that protected itself. There was no society of large regions of unwanted ladies, unmarried ladies, because these things were taken care of within the context of the culture and the religion, not alien to the religion that people were selling to them. And they began to think, with the coming of these different people, these different religions, began to sell a version of their own religion to them and began to use it as a political tool. You couldn't make the African a Christian because he's Christian already. He was a Christian, more Christian than you, because if his brother, older brother dies, he's responsible for the maintenance of his brother's children. And that's designed in the society itself. We have gotten too far from these basic societies, assuming that they are unchristian, not knowing that they are purely Christian and that they didn't have to use the word Christian or build a temple. They lived it out. You got enough bread for 6 people? Things were divided so that everybody in the society could get a part of it. So I'm trying to show that the nature of their struggle was the highest form of education, because they got to know themselves. Now let's look at the dilemma of the African away from home. Let's start in the Caribbean islands, mainly because the Africans were functioning, revolting, and trying to educate themselves in the Caribbean islands 100 years before the arrival of Africans in Jamestown, Virginia, in 1619. This is not flattery, this is how to be true. Because the rehearsal for the mass slave trade, for the dispersion of Africans throughout the New World, started really in the Caribbean islands. I'm not dealing with the pre-Columbian presence that you have told about and I've assumed that you know about. The basis of that large migration will start on these islands. All right, what about struggle in relationship to education? He got, in some cases, a basic education, mostly an education to be a servant to the colonial administrator that held sway over the island. This is why the word Clarke means so much in these societies, because if the British train you to be a clerk when they train you at all, And they train you these other things because they're pathological lazy and they do not want to ever be engaged in manual labor. Fortunately, because of this struggle and because of certain nature built-in elements, the Africans in the Caribbean islands got a rough-hewed education because he was educated not so much to serve himself, but to serve the colonial master. And the colonial master did not know that these Africans were learning a lot of things that they could use in slave revolts. He made the cutlass now. He repaired the farm equipment and the sugar mill. And when someone's back was turned, he would fashion a sword or a dagger and put it carefully away for the time when he will need it. Now, why did this happen there different from here? See, I argue on the basis of the difference of certain Africans in certain places. I don't argue about who is better because there's nothing better to be attached to any form of slavery. It's all bad. It began to accommodate its local condition based on the absence and the presence of the authority of the master. Now, I've said this before, but it's worth going over, that with the settlement of the Caribbean islands, and with a form of, after the thug and the riffraff came, the British began to rule. Some aristocrats who had big houses, and they brought over from England furniture made from soft woods. And some of those island termites began to eat the furniture for dessert. Now, with the passing of the white craftsman, the slave craftsman emerged. Not because anybody wanted him to emerge, because there was nobody else to do it. And he could duplicate that British furniture in Jamaican hardwood or Trinidadian hardwood. So he became indispensable. Now that he could do this, other things were available to him. Managing sugar mills, making the equipment, blacksmithery, shoeing the horses. So he had a leverage of freedom, and a free class emerged ahead of those in the United States. And that free class, through its struggle, became the active freedmen. Because of that skill, they could work in the evenings and work on Sundays and could purchase their independence or negotiate for it. So these groups of freed men, all pursuing a form of higher education, met in the first half of the 19th century. The latter part of the 18th, the first half of the 19th century. There was communication between the freed men of New England and freed men of the Caribbean islands. They had enough leadway to meet each other on terms where they never used the word Jamaica, and one never used the word American. They learned what we have forgotten, that the slave boats brought no West Indians, East Indians, no Deltas, no AKAs, no people who belonged to a blue vein society. But none of those people came on the boat. Everybody had to become what he thought he needed to become in order to survive. So the meeting of the dynamic black ministry of the Caribbean islands and the dynamic black ministry of the United States was a form of education growing out of struggle. The two of them would create what they call the Negro Convention movement. We became then, but we still are, the most meetingist people and the most resolutionist people. We will meet and get out a resolution in a minute. May not remember it the next day, but we'll get it out there. George Padmore, one of the early fathers of Pan-Africanism, the three great Pan-Africans all came from Trinidad. George is in the middle. At the top, of course, is H. Sylvester Williams and George Padmore, the younger. And the last of the living great Trinidadian Pan-Africanists, still alive in England, C.L.R. James. Now, when they began to meet one free man with another, noticing the other's condition, they began to assist each other as an African people. And what we have lost in our struggle for education, we have created artificial divisions that the 19th century black did not have. So there was nothing extraordinary about a Caribbean minister being in charge of a black American church, or black American minister being in charge of a Caribbean church. This is how Henry Highland Garnett, with the assistance of Ruswan and Campbell, both Jamaicans, got to go to Jamaica and rest up from the war in the United States and from the encroachment of rights in the United States. These were the New England freedmen. This is where Henry Highland Garnett, learning that conditions in the United States had not changed, he thanked his Jamaican host and said, "I will return to the United States to fight the rest of my life. I will not return to seek integration because I do not expect that. I will not return to seek justice because I do not expect that. I will return to devote the rest of my life to tearing that republic down." Black men don't speak this way anymore. Black men don't, they're saying, integrate me into the house. For the 19th century, I'll tear the house down. Either I am a man within the house, or I'll burn down the house. We have lost something by way of communication one to the other, because there was a period each one of us understood each other's struggle, and we gave it a single name, the struggle of African people away from home. We were clear on it. We're not clear now. If we were clear on it right now, everybody would be getting food, blankets or something to Jamaica. There won't be any argument about it. Won't be much of a discussion about it. So collectively, any place where our people are in danger by natural causes or nature causes, we rally. The one thing we want to know is that our people, they got trouble, I come to you with your troubles, you come to me with mine when I'm in trouble. We would live out Pan-Africanism. We won't preach about it and forget about it. We would live it out. A union. And something went wrong because different ones of us were educated under different types of slave masters. And when you look at the early free school in New York City and the lot, when you look at Rochester, New York, as a meeting ground, the incubator for so much that would go into African education in this country. Frederick Douglass's home once. Frederick Douglass published his monthly from Rochester. Many of the slaves escaping from the north, the south through the north, went through Rochester. Isn't it peculiar that I've never known a black scholar write a PhD thesis on the role of Rochester in in our freedom struggle. Now, as the 19th century opened, we had behind us a good relationship one to the other. And because one of us had an educational system that was not an educational system at all, was outlawed, the other could get basic learning, not for the mass, because British education was never meant for the mass, not even now. The British educate an elite, a technical elite, flying elite, a military elite. Their education is for elite. The whole concept of the public school for everybody is new in England. So in the Caribbean islands, they educated a technical elite. Most of the technical elite educated themselves. And maybe the word elite is not even right here. These were skilled craftsmen. And they kept the plantations going. They built the big houses. They cut the mahogany. They took care of the harbors. While in the United States, and we need to look at this now, because we were outnumbered, they made a special point of not letting us see ourselves, or not letting others see us in a skilled position. Now, growing up in the South, that was a custom, even in the collection of garbage and night soil. Blacks would do the collecting, the white man would drive the truck. They did not want to see them in a skillful position that required thinking. This is why a certain mentality developed in one place that did not develop quite the same way in another place. In the Caribbean, you could see people in petty officer jobs, schoolmasters, chief of police. It was not because the British loved them, because they didn't want the job. They did not want the job. That's labor, that's work. This was demonstrated in the closing years of the 19th century, when a young man, he wasn't too young, he was mature enough, but came to the United States. Now, he had been a tax collector on his native island, and a good one, well qualified. Heard of a test that's going to be given in Long Island to be tax collector for the rich neighborhood in Long Island. They said the person who make the highest mark going to get the job. His name was T.A., well, those three initials, then a name, Shaw. Mr. Shaw took the exam and passed with the highest mark. No black American took the job because they knew damn well if they passed with the high mark, they weren't going to get the job. So they didn't bother. Shaw took the test, and Shaw never understood American racism. He said, your paper says the one who make the highest mark would be appointed. Now what's your problem? I made the highest mark. Why didn't an American take the same attitude? Because he grew up in a country where he never seen his people collect the taxes. When you grow up in a country where you see, not only seeing your people collect the taxes, collect them yourself, you have the confidence that if one brain can collect taxes, another one can collect taxes. So there was, in between these two people, different atmospheres, different types of oppression, but their education was now coming out of struggle and somewhat political naivete. When Prince Hall came to the United States from Barbados, he heard all of the talk about liberty and justice and democracy, and not growing up in the United States where he would know better, he assumed that they were talking about us also. His assumptions led him to investigate, how do you get justice in the United States, if you get justice at all? Someone told him if you had property, you could get a little justice. You got property, didn't change nothing. If you're a preacher, you could get a little justice. You became a preacher, didn't change nothing. Because his coloration didn't change. Finally, they told him, if you have an organization, you can get some justice. So he went to the British trying to get a charter for the Masons, first black Masons. British didn't give him one. A Scotch and Irish regiment, angry with the British, gave him a charter. And when he found and laid the foundation for black Masonry in this country, he did not call it a Masonic order. He called it the African Lodge. Now, what you need to understand is that throughout up until the early part of the 20th century, both of us were hanging out with the word African as against color, as against being a black Britisher. It is the early part of the 20th century when our dilemma in education became such a problem, because self-education, community education, and indoctrination have been part of our education. And to educate African people in the United States in the same way they were educated in the Caribbean, educated to serve their colonial master. But once you got the education, it couldn't be taken away from you. Good fundamental education. While in the United States you were denied basic education. So it was a surreptitious thing. We had to do it at South, we had to do it at night, had to do it in secret. But with limitations. There was no university in the whole of the Caribbean, so that means that no one intended for you to have higher education, but basic education for the reality of containing an island for the profit of your colonial master. While the whole thing is operating differently in the United States, the few educated ones were the New Englanders who had worked their way out of servitude or escaped, and they would come together after the convention movement got underway and formed the American Colonization Society. Now, a lot of Americans had difficulty with the society because there were too many white endorsers, and Frederick Douglass was against it because he said that our right to stay in this country was earned by our forefathers. We sweat for this country, we pushed the forests aside, we raised the cotton. We are the immigrant group, though coming against our will. We are the one immigrant group that came with an invitation. Now, the nature of the invitation would not be discussed because the invitees brought some guns and some chains to make sure we didn't jump out of the boat. We arrived in good shape for work, of course. And they tapped the flower of African manhood physically. They didn't take the second best, they took the best they could find. They didn't take the cripples. But my main point, getting back to Prince Hall, we need to study this relationship. Why do we need to study Prince Hall? Prince Hall, Barbados. Peter Ogden, Antigua. The largest number of freedom fighters joining the freedom fight in the United States from Jamaica is Russ Wam, Jamaican, Robert Campbell, Jamaican, and quite a few others. Because of the size of Jamaica and the little leverage they had, one to invite one to the other, Jamaica became kind of the resting place for the activist ministers in the United States. Prince Hall would laid the basis for not only the Masonic order, but responsible lodges and community activist organizations in this country. So as we enter the bottom part of the 19th century, Prince Hall had already organized his Masonic order, the African Lodge. Frederick Douglass had already started his Douglass Monthly and the North Star. Freedom's Journal was being edited by Russ Wam and an Afro-American. After Freedom's Journal, Russ Wam would go to Liberia. We'd find a paper called the Liberian Herald, still in existence. And he became a governor of one of the provinces in Liberia. And he took a stand when Frederick Douglass was against it. He said, the American Colonization Society is giving us the opportunity to prove that we can run a state. And though it was infiltrated by whites who wanted just to get us out of here, they didn't care where we went. And Lincoln was one of them. It gave us the opportunity to be sovereign again. And he took this opportunity. Douglass continued to argue the point, but Douglass said, and correctly, if there are whites in America who want to give an African a trip back to Africa, why are they anxious to give the African free man a trip and not the slaves, who would appreciate it a little more? Maybe he liked the journey. See, but amidst this, the Africans in the whole of the Western world, in the Caribbean islands, and parts of South America, and in the United States, began to create myths about Africa to sustain their emotions, to keep from being holy. This is where the whole legend of the flying African started. African on a plantation was told, I flew home to Africa last night. So why didn't you stay? All these youngins I got here and wife I got here, I come back to my family. So if you grew up in the South, when time I grew up, you grew up with mythology and allegory and folk tales that we told each other to enhance ourselves one to the other. Each one had a set of myths that they used to sustain themselves. I have listened to all the stories about High John the Conqueror. I know that not a single one of them is true. I like the story of John Henry who could stop a train, because it rescued my ego at a sudden, when I look at in the midst of oppression, how weak I was. I go into black folklore, into the John Henry stories, into High John the Conqueror stories, and even the Brer Rabbit stories. There's an essential myth in the life of every people. Now, if you understand that sustaining myth, sustaining story is good. Now let's take a current event. I'm a great admirer of Jesus Christ as a teacher, with or without the holiness. So I hope you understand what I'm saying. He always taught using information in front of them, in front of him. He addressed himself to the culture, the current situation. And when he said that who was without fault cast the first stone, there was somebody in front of him about to be killed. I like to think that this might have been the beginning of psychiatry, making people look at themselves. If you're so pure, you go where? You look inside of yourself, you'll find something you wouldn't apologize for, something you regret you did, and something you want to keep to yourself. And you'll be a little different when you look at other people. Now let's take a current event that the story of the God people, that beautiful legend that comes out of their folklore about the defeat of the Ashantis. I've investigated this on the spot, and I've listened to both sides now. There's an exaggeration on the part of the gods. But when the Ashantis tell the story, they exaggerate too. And when the Aquapims, who helped the gods tell the story, they said they fought the battle all by themselves and the gods didn't do nothing. And tell the God story, and they said that we fought it all ourselves, the Aquapims didn't do nothing. But each one tells the story to aggrandize himself. And sometimes you spoil the beauty of the story by being old stuffy historian who's going around looking for the truth. This happened to be one of those stories where I searched out the real truth. And the truth is, there was a king at Kumasi of the Osara Tutu line, Osara Tutu Kawemene. And the British wanted to take the hinterlands. And he said that there was a young British governor named Maclean. He said that if you come up here, I'm going to send your head back to the coast on a silver platter. Maclean played the fool, went up to Asante, Osara Tutu Kawemene, sent his head back to the coast on a silver platter, knowing full well that this would provoke war. He had his best warriors stay home. In the midst of this crisis, he had a slight disagreement with the God people. And so he could only send his scrubby army down to Accra to deal with the gods. The gods, of course, beat the hell out of them, but they didn't beat the hell out of the number one team because the number one team wasn't even in the battle. Now, if you go to a wake in Africa, especially Ghana, the story is spelled out. And the women, seeing that brave God warriors coming back from the field, throw down a garment for the men to dance on. After the dancing, there's a great feast. And the women dance, waving at these retreating Asantes. Shame, shame on you. Why did you bother us in the first place? Every time there's a wake or a great feast, the story gets told and danced out. I'm saying the real story is just as interesting as the myth. You have to learn how to enjoy both of them. And they again tell the story of their creation, because there's as many creation stories in Africa as there are African people. I've heard them all and didn't argue with any of them. Anytime in Africa say we are the most homogeneous Africans in Africa, you just, that's very nice. Go 10 miles down the road, another going to tell you the same thing. And go among the Musi people, that they say that when we conquer people, we don't integrate their wives, we don't even integrate our cattle. The Musi cow is sacred. He's not to mix his blood with these alien cows over there. And if they conquer you, and if you needed a wife, they give you permission to go home and choose your wife. Don't be choosing a Musi people. The Musi woman is his preserve. Well, the Hereros in Southeast Africa now, called Namibia, acted the same way. The same struggle and the same approach. So one day, after hearing the story of how that god Anim blew his breath on a fire, created a hole, and created some sum-sums called soul, said, go forth, you great Akan people, and civilize the world. And as they march to civilize the world, the Lord said, stop, you got to have a chop. Nothing good in Africa starts before the banquet. So now, being served with plates of gold by beautiful maidens, now with your stomach full, contentment, now go forth and civilize the world. Go among the Igbos, you hear a similar story. Go among the Yoruba, tell is this why you got to learn how to enjoy people's folklore? And you have to learn how to accept it, the history from the folklore, because this is part of the education and understanding the nature of culture and the enhancement of the human being in relationship to culture. That being enslaved or being threatened, we had to create stories to get us outside of it in order to save our sanity. So our struggle was a part of our education. Years later, my first trip in Africa, where I read all of these stories before, I was with an African professor who took me out to show me the sacred hole where the people were born, where God blew his breath and created the sum-sums, the soul of a people. And I said very casually, you know, Professor, my research proves that the Can people, especially, used to live in East Africa. He said, yes, that is true. And because they revolt against anyone trying to fasten a religion on them not of their choosing, they move out of the way. Then they move to Central, to the Volta River area. He said, yes, that's true. They found a kingdom called Acania, which is the basis of that name, Akan. Early in the 18th century, they began to migrate in larger numbers. Although the first migration appeared about 1073 with the invasion of the area by a North African named Abu Bakr. He says, yes, that is true. I said, if this is essentially true, what about the story about the hole and the creating of the sum-sums? He said, do you want to spoil a good story with the truth? I said, no. I will not spoil a good story with the truth. I will not give up High John the Conqueror or John Henrik. So you know reason why they should give up that God who was so powerful that he can breathe fire, create a hole and create souls and tell them to go forth and civilize the world. The main point is that in struggle and in education and in folklore and in listening to the old men under a tree, there was a form of informal education that locked them into that culture. And our crisis today is we are being given an education that does not lock us into our culture. So therefore we are being miseducated in all of these places. In South America, in the Caribbean islands, they could maintain a cultural continuity much better because they spoke the same tonal language, they speak the same drum language. And they could communicate with each other in front of the slave master without the slave master understanding. In this country, our oppression was so brutal. They literally outlawed the language, they outlawed the rituals until we became a linguistic prisoner to our slave master's language, not knowing any of our own. So this kind of education and miseducation came out of the nature of struggle. And this struggle will be set in motion first in the Caribbean islands. It is no accident that the massive slave revolts in the United States came after the triumph of Toussaint L'Ouverture in Haiti. Black sailors going back and forth on ships began to get the word out that somewhere on an island the Africans had rose up and made themselves a nation. What confused me is that they called Toussaint L'Ouverture Old Man Toussaint. And Toussaint was barely 50. I don't think an old man is old at 50. Anybody at the age that I am is not considered old. You're considered old if you're older than me. And while I did useful service at 50, and married the second time on the verge of being 50. I'd love to see 50 again and would be very satisfied with it. And could do justice to it, I hope. So why people refer to Toussaint Louverture, an old man of 50 who never saw a uniform until he was 40. But the main thing is that Haiti became an independent state, and the inspiration of the Haitian revolt inspired massive revolts in the United States. Why is it that Jamaica fought longer and harder without being the inspiration of the revolt? Jamaica fought longer and harder, but had to deal with a different slave master and a different military lay of the land. Different geography, different political attitudes. The French was stupid. People get nervous when I call Napoleon was an idiot. France hasn't got 1 inch of the soil he conquered for France. It was a big ego trip. Anybody who would invade Russia in the summertime is a fool. Invade Russia in the wintertime, you are more than that. There are 2 nations in the world no one should ever invade: Russia and China. They don't fight you. They move away from you and let you wear yourself down looking for them. Then they bring out gentle wind, rain, and snow. But it's you all. Leave it to the elements. In China, they move about, and your arm is tired when you think you found it. 1/3 of all the Japanese that invaded China never went home. They moved about, they got so tired, wanted to drink a water, want some food, and looked around and saw a beautiful Chinese girl and made China his home. Never went home. Some of Napoleon's troops never left Russia. Stayed there, married Russian women, and lived from then on. Lost their way home, all that snow. Everything is white, you don't know east or west. Any lady want to show you home is welcome. Sometimes she showed you her home, and you was her man then on, and you became a Russian because she made you a Russian. Now back to our struggle, because we've never used the uniqueness of our struggle in revolution. Why am I pointing out Haiti and Jamaica? Principally because they have a similar geography. They have some hills that are so monstrous, challenging, that you can go up into those hills and live indefinitely. You know, no conflict with a white man because he can't get up there. And you can look down and see him, but he don't even see you. And a good supply of rocks would discourage him from coming up. Now you see how struggle is creating a form of education that otherwise would not exist. Knowing that they didn't have the weaponry to match England, knowing that they did not have enough firepower to face them frontally, they had no great cavalry, so they had to hit and run, and they were successful until concessions were made to them that lightened their burden but not eliminated that burden. Let no one tell you any nonsense about slavery was mild in the Caribbean. Slavery was not mild any place. It was different at different times. And you cannot boast about slavery was eliminated in the Caribbean islands 30 years before eliminated in the United States. That all means that your fakery came in front of our fakery because you're not liberated now. Slavery was transformed, but not eliminated. We still live under a form of slavery. This is what Marcus Garvey was talking about. This is why each time we analyze our struggle, we can't make Marcus Garvey go away. I said recently in a conference in Jamaica, if Marcus Garvey lived in Jamaica today, some Jamaican would stone him to death. There's nothing Garvey-out about Jamaica today. There's nothing Garvey-out about the spirit in the Caribbean today. There is a developing spirit, but it's developing. That's a challenge coming from the youth who are tired of imitating the former colonial masters who are ready to innovate, to bring forth something new, and look to demand an educational system that would be more meaningful to them. They are tired of reading the British classics and remembering all the British kings, but they can't remember the family that lives on the other side of the hill in Jamaica. They're tired of being read out of history. And now they're beginning to learn something which surprised others. I hope it's not anything that hurt anybody. Now, the revolutions in the Caribbean came before the American Revolution. You read about the American Revolution. This is the first revolution that established a republic. There was a revolution in Guyana, the Barbados Revolution, revolution in Palmares, revolution in Bahia. All of these revolutions led by blacks came before the American Revolution. There wasn't even a revolution at all. It's an argument between the senior and the junior branch of the British family. The junior branch decided that they didn't want to be ruled by the other. And many Englishmen in the United States did not even fight in the American Revolution. They went to Canada instead because they were royalists. And many of them sent Africans to fight in the American Revolution as replacement for the son who would not fight. You see, if you look at the honor rolls, look at the muster rolls, the list of people who've been discharged. I read the late Lorenzo Turner, he only died a few months ago, a book called The Negro in Colonial New England. And he went and looked at the records of the large enlistment of blacks in the American Revolution. Many of them sent by rich families who did not want to sacrifice their son, but who wanted to sacrifice a slave. Well, I know some basic things about this subject that Lorenzo Turner was one of the people that adopted me. I've always been fortunate because the senior black teachers, before I was a senior, always adopted me and fed me good information, including some information they dared not teach in the classroom. J.E. Rogers, and most people don't know that J.E. Rogers was a Jamaican, a very proud Jamaican that served in the British Army and walked like a soldier to the last day of his life. We had many times together, a whole lot of good arguments, but one thing that Rogers did was to establish the fact of blacks as revolutionary figures in the social change of Europe and the social change of the world. And he peddled his books almost door to door and died broke because he was giving out a certain kind of education that others had neglected. Now, I've written a piece that I'm going to go over It was the Caribbean presence in the Afro-American freedom movement. Not to flatter either side, because if you look at it honestly, at the incubator, at the beginning of the struggle in the 17th and the 18th century, while it began in a formal sense with Prince Hall of Barbados's participation, there were men before Prince Hall who became lesser known. Oh, I forgot to tell you that Shaw got the job as tax collector in the Hampshires. That's a rich neighborhood, and kept the job for over 20 years. It is after Shaw that a black American specialist on taxes, so I'm going to show you how one learns from the other, one takes inspiration from the other. Charlie Anderson became tax collector of New York City 1st and 2nd District, and when he died he was tax collector of the 3rd District. He was so astute in the collection of taxes, he could read taxation into almost everything. I remember mentioning the Joseph and Mary story in his presence. He said, that's a tax story. You know one thing? It is. The Romans wanted everybody together and be counted so they could know how much taxes every head had to pay taxes. You can't make everybody pay unless you count them and find out where they are. It's not only a tax story, it's a beautiful story. I'm not arguing the rightness and the wrongness of it. I'm saying that it's a very revealing story. Everybody going to be counted so the Romans will know how much tax they do from different villages. Now, when you look at the education of Charlie Anderson, the Republicans, and look at his counterpart on the Democratic Party, Ferdinand Q. Morton, you have two of the early, truly brilliant politicians who delivered patronage. They got something for their community. The black politician of today is not delivering much to the community by way of patronage. He's not. Charlie Anderson and Ferdinand Q. Morton pretended they were mortal enemies. And Charlie Anderson, Republican, would go to his head of the Republican Party and say that if you don't give me more money and more appointments, that Morton will take everything from us. We won't be getting any votes out of that community. This is the early beginning of Harlem. Then Ferdinand Q. Morton would go to his people and say, you know that Charlie, that man, he's going to get all the votes unless we give a Democratic black more. So finally, Ed Lee, who created Charlie Anderson, the heart of African politics in that period was a black bellhop named Ed Lee, who was bellhop at the old Warwick Hotel, where Tammany Hall went for extracurricular activities, not necessarily with their wives. A little gambling, a little drinking, a little visiting the ladies. So Charlie, being the chief elevator operator and supervisor of the porters, had dirt on everybody. And when Ed Lee asked the head of Tammany Hall, William Clarke, for the money to start a Tammany Hall branch in Harlem, he got the money. And Clarke told him, I will put a Negro in every department of government. We need to reanalyze this, because that's one of the few political promises that were made to us that was almost kept. During the time we had black assistant supervisor of sanitation, assistant this and assistant that. But we did have them in every department. Between Ferdinand Q. Morton for the Democrats, these are the men who came after Ed Lee, Charlie Anderson, They found within the Democratic Party something called a United Color Democracy. That was the black arm of the Democratic Party. And they began to deliver patronage until finally they had played all kinds of tricks on the whites, pretending to be mortal enemies. When they came uptown, they broke a bottle of scotch, and that's where the old custom of scotch and milk started. Quarter milk and scotch, and drink themselves on the table laughing at the tricks they played on the white folks. Black Republicans and Democrats don't unite today in order to get patronage from their people based on the fact that if you don't give them this, they're not going to vote. They don't threaten the white political machinery as these men did. Charlie Anderson became Collective Tax's first district. He had the nerve to call in old J.P. Morgan. So, Mr. Morgan, you are delinquent in your taxes. Morgan wanted to know from his secretary who let him in and who gave him an appointment. And the secretary said, Mr. Morgan, that's the collective internal revenue for the first district. I didn't know that he needed an appointment. He reminded the Morgan family that they lent America $63 million during the Spanish-American War. And every time the United States tried to pay back the Morgan, they refused to take the money. But instead of paying me back right now, we know the government is having a little difficulty. If you get any information on stocks and bonds and inventions in foreign countries, just give it to me first. They had more than enough made their money by having an inside track on German inventions, French inventions. Basic detergents will come. The whole soap industry, literally stolen by the DuPonts, came out of it. Now you see, our labor and our self-education and miseducation creating the basis for American capitalism, the basis for the economic system we now live under. I would like one day for a black child to look up at a skyscraper and realize, except for 300 years of free labor extracted from my people, either the skyscraper wouldn't be there or I would be the owner of the skyscraper. Once he liberates his mind from the smallness of striving just to be alive, petitioning each day for the right to live to the end of the day, having his time so tied up in that the matter of surviving and putting some bread on the table or some shoes on his children's feet takes so much time, he cannot aspire, he cannot plan to revolt. He can do nothing but go home and eat and take a shower and get ready for the next day. Now this explains in part why most revolutions are started by middle class people. It is started by middle class people because the middle class is angry with the upper class, and they're trying to say to the lower class, as you and I unite and deal with the upper class. He wants to deal with the upper class for one reason: he can't get into it. And they got something he wants. If they let him in, that would tone down his anger and be more or less satisfied. But he's tried to get in, he's failed to get in. Now, as we were being educated to serve and developing independent institutions of our own, we had no choices except either we create an independent institution or we have no institution at all. And we have not made an assessment of the argument for education in the closing years of the 19th century. We have not looked at the emancipation, the proliferation of schools endorsed by white missionaries, some totally independent, run by black churches. Some of these schools still exist, having some difficulty, but they still exist. We had to either build an independent institution or have no institution at all. While in the Caribbean islands, they got assistance in building institutions so long as the institution conforms to a British concept of education. They fasten them with a concept of education alien to their historical interest, but in keeping with the historical interest of the colonial master. So when people come among you and laugh at your culture, then make you laugh at your culture, then change the color of the deity to look like them instead of you, they don't have to build any jails. We dare not tell them our concept of God as black was here before your concept of white. We fail to see that the popes in Rome commissioned Michelangelo and other master artists to paint the Holy Family. And so they painted them to resemble themselves. Gave Moses a beard because his uncle had a beard and his uncle was his model. Nobody can prove that Moses had a beard, or how he looked at all, or whether he existed at all. But the story about him is some of the most beautiful of all biblical stories. Most of us became religious without learning how to read the Bible and how to extract from it a lot of supporting things for ourselves other than spirituality. We would not admit then or now that it is basically a Jewish survival book, and a very good one. There's no objection to it because it contains the body of some of the finest wisdom man has ever been capable of. But if you understand who wrote it, who put it together, and what they put it together for, you could probably get more out of it by extracting something for yourself without violating its moral law. You look at an Ethiopian Bible, there's only one white character, the devil. Some of us have taken these biblical stories and made classics out of them. I remember only a few weeks ago speaking to Van Peebles, who's a fine humorist. Then at a fundraising event, someone's apartment, he was telling this story. The two men were sitting at the gates, and as people approached, the judgment, one says, heaven for you, hell for you, maybe heaven for you. So finally a brother approached, and the devil was standing about non-committal, just playing around with his tail like a nightstick. And finally he said, hell for you. He said, well, I'm not going to have to act decently. Like, what you send me there for? See, the devil said, go down there. The devil said, we don't discriminate down here. And we like to treat people just the opposite of the way they were treated on earth. There's a cool part of hell I'm going to send you to, where you will eat pork chops and neck bones, fried chicken, the rest of your natural life. Now that's a lie, but it's a good innovation on the story, on a biblical story. So if you had it hard in real life, I'm going to make it soft here. So he reverses heaven and hell to mean different things. This is an excellent interpretation using humor. I think we'd get more out of it if we understood the stories from the basic roots of the stories. I think it would become more spiritual to us, not less. Now I can argue against the corruption of religions But I never argue against spirituality that is universal and that no single human being on this face of the earth can live without in any form. He must have it in some form. But when he has no spirituality in any form, he might as well go live among the dogs and the beasts. Because the one thing that establishes us, the one thing that differentiates between us, that we walk upright and we think, and we reproduce ourselves with some kind of consistency, with a reason. So I never met an unspiritual people. I never really met an atheist people, not even in Russia, who lies about it. So we don't need to discuss people without spirituality or without religion. They have religion in some form. Now what we fail to understand in relationship to education is what that debate with Du Bois and Booker T. Washington was about. It was about an approach to education, not against education itself. Washington had the more practical program then, more applicable to our needs right now. A people not so long after slavery need good carpenters and roofers, good bricklayers, and before they get politicians. Because if you get the basics of life on your own home, own farm, this is going to inevitably lead you to politics because you want it protected. So the Booker T. Washington approach would have logically led to the Du Bois approach. That was premature given the time, not wrong, but misplaced. Du Bois himself had to go through a process of learning after he had created his small classic work, Souls of Black Folks and the Gifts of Black Folks. And that process of learning would come out of struggle, principally in 1906. There was a riot in Atlanta. Du Bois, proper gentleman, mustache and cane, spats, wanted to deal with these wanted to ask whites how to deal with these ruffians. So he was trying to get across Atlanta to communicate. En route, he discovered whites had closed their stores, cut off the water, cut off the electricity. But he found communities where the lights had been turned on, the water was flowing, and the ruffians had opened up the grocery store and with great humanity given out food, women and children first. This is what I call the Bo Diddley syndrome. We have not studied that pool room crowd. We have not studied the fact that all the education and degrees make you love life so much you hesitate to hit anybody. He hasn't got it, and he don't care. He got one life to give, he might as well give that one up and take some company with him. He becomes more of a revolutionary hero than a cautious middle class. Du Bois discovered that some of them would barefoot and climb the telephone poles until they found the right lever to turn the lights back on. Look through manholes until they found the right wheel to turn to get the water back on. And was distributing food. Du Bois learned a lesson from that struggle that carried him the rest of his life. That until you capture the soul and the attention of the working class, you can't bring off no revolution. The middle class rather negotiate. Bo Diddley and his crowd are going to have it one way or the other. Now I'm trying to point to how education comes out of struggle, and why struggle is the highest form of education, because it is a practical education. I am not against formal education, but I'm for people learning from survival struggles, learning from what they have to do. Out of the same struggle, 1906, Du Bois took a stand in the Brownsville raids along with Washington. Common ordinary black people understood that this was a grave injustice in Brownsville, Texas, and a crime charged to black soldiers that black soldiers had not committed. And it was wrong. And Du Bois had asked for clemency, and Washington had asked for clemency. And both of them were wrong, because neither one asked for justice. It was these ordinary black soldiers that understood the nature of that case. So as we move into the 20th century, arguing about education, W.E.B. Du Bois at the center stage of it all. Booker T. Washington would die in 1915. Du Bois would publish his first overview of African history the same year, a little book called The Negro. The same year, a Jamaican had made plans to come to the United States and couldn't get the funds together, having been invited by Booker T. Washington. He got the funds together by 1906. By 1916, a year after the death of Booker Washington. Now we got to deal with something which we've been misinterpreting all these years for flattery. The assumption that there was no movement back to Africa, there was no African consciousness before Marcus Garvey. It was African consciousness. Bishop Turner had literally taken people back to Africa. Paul Cuffey had done the same thing 100 years ago. Robert Campbell, a Jamaican, had accompanied Martin Delaney in trips back to Africa to establish a place for settlement. Everything Marcus Garvey advocated except one item had been tried before Marcus Garvey got here. Contrary to a lie that is often told that Marcus Garvey found black Americans with a wishbone and gave them a backbone. That sounds cute, but it's not true. We had mounted a 100-year war against oppression, and after the betrayal of the Reconstruction, we had to mount still another. Then what did Marcus Garvey bring that attracted so many people? The concept of state formation and the reintroduction of the concept of state management. We were fighting for a piece of bread from someone else's kitchen, and Marcus Garvey said, we want bread from our kitchen. We want to control the baker, the cook, and the stove, and everything that goes with it. And we'll accept the responsibility. He introduced the concept that had been driven out of black America. The concept that they once ruled nations and would have to give that mind to do it again. I maintain that however you look at Marcus Garvey, if you looked at him honestly, you would understand he was a great educator. And he was teaching many things that sounded like fantasy. He was teaching a new reality. His Liberian scheme alone would have brought about the African freedom explosion a whole generation before it occurred. In his Liberian scheme, the Liberians who were tools to the United States then, are tools to the United States now, a sloppy American colony, no matter how you cut it, was told to let Marcus Garvey have the illusion that he can settle in Liberia. He had a spy network. He would give copies of his paper, The Negro World, to black sailors and They drop him off at different ports, and so he became an international man from his vantage point in the Harlem community. While we were thinking and we were fighting and we were planning, but not on the same international scale. We were not thinking nation. He made us think nation, think whole. He demonstrated it through ceremony. Many black men downtown, elevator starter, porter, white man said, "Hey George, hey Joe." Downtown, that same man would come uptown as a major and a colonel in the paramilitary organization of Marcus Garvey, who created even a dukedom, to make us think, realize that we were once royal people, and we had to once more become royal people. He was bringing a whole new lesson that had not been taught before quite that way. He was saying not only you can board the ship, but you can own the ship and run the ship. You don't have to be adjuncts to somebody else's something. You can be the something. I do not think he was understood in his time, and I do not think he is understood right now. And in my search for this new material on the work on Pan-Africanism that I've devoted most of the summer and practically finished, a short history of Pan-Africanism, I kept looking at Marcus Garvey again, especially his African fundamentals. This man had laid out a basic constitution, a political approach to Africa. Read David Walker's appeal to the colored people of the world. Read Marcus Garvey's African fundamentalists. And read Malcolm X's message to the grassroots. They're all saying the same thing. Land is the basis of nation. And what we went wrong is that was a debate between Melvin Huskovitz and E. Franklin Frazier. And E. Franklin Frazier assumed that the African in the United States, the African in the whole of the New World, had lost all of his Africanness. And he had no loyalty, needed no loyalty, because he was a physical ethnic creation created in the United States by the United States. It is unfortunate, but Melvin Huskovitz, an anthropological hustler, saw a golden opportunity to get a reputation among blacks. And so he repudiated Frazier by pointing out the African culture in the New World that was the sustaining factor in his life in the New World. This debate between E. Franklin Frazier and Huskovitz need to be gone over. Out of it, Huskovitz wrote his book called The Myth of the Negro Past. And yet, while Huskovitz became kind of a hero for that book, people forgot that Huskovitz had said blacks cannot be objective in interpreting themselves. They're too emotional. And he deliberately kept most blacks out of the field of anthropology. Blacks did not go into anthropology in any depth until the early years, the mid-years of the 20th century. He let one or two through who praised him the rest of his life without understanding there was no praise due. Into this atmosphere of the early works of Huskovitz, the education to an understanding of history by Carter Woodson, other great teachers unfortunately forgotten, Raphael Powell, still alive, the first one to take up this word Negro and to show how the word is a negative factor in our life, and to point to the fact that the proper name of a people must always relate to language, history, and culture. Land, history, and culture. If there was no Negro land, there's no Negro people. See, black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are.
That's true.
All white people take a name that means nation. Just recently, and they're still trying to work it out, Simon & Schuster, his big publishing house, wanted to publish, they publish a timetable of American history, timetable of Jewish history, timetable of various histories in the world. Now they want a timetable of black history. And they're giving $30,000 in advance, which is not very much money, because I even turned it down. Can you imagine me turning down that? See, I know that this is a 3-year project, and $10,000 won't even pay for your clerk, typist. So there's not enough money there to work with to compile a monumental work dealing with the dates and personalities relevant to African people all over the world for all times. There's nothing there. Not enough for that. Now if you go out and raise extra money, that's a different question. But my main point is that they wanted the one on American history is called American. One on Jewish history is called Jewish. They want this one to be called a timetable of black world history. And I said that I will not edit anything that does not identify us as part of a nation, part of geography. Now you see the results of hanging out with Richard B. Moore and all that crowd, some left, some right. Even though Harold Cruz, who is absolutely a genius in creating a good title for a book, but totally inept at writing the content that goes with the book. The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual is not even really about the crisis of the Negro Intellectual, it's about Harold Cruz. The Crisis of Harold Cruz in relationship to the black intellectual. That's a good book. In his latest book that I'm going to have to review at a conference in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, in about 3 weeks from now, plural but equal. Now, what is Harold talking about? Who is plural? Plural but equal. America it's a plural society, but all the parts are not equal. It's still the male white syndrome. See, Lorraine Hansberry said you never tell a laundryman whose clothes are dirty. They about hung around too long because I knew some of these guys when they needed a change. A political change, of course. I was in those clubs Harold was writing about. And I know it's a personal anger that plagues him other than a common political interest. Now, in his book Plural but Equal, he maintained this is a plural society, but everybody is equal within the society. All white people are not equal within the society. I grew up in the South when Italians ran corner grocery stores in the black neighborhood and lived behind the store with a black mistress. And many of our outstanding people came out of these Italian, nobody called them Italians, then they call them Dagos, light-skinned niggas. Now they've emerged the most brutal police on the force, Irish, Catholic, Italian Catholic. But we've forgotten all this living. We've forgotten the concubinage of the black woman furnishing children for them when they didn't even have Italian women. We've forgotten two of our outstanding people, one in sports, one in literature, came from one of these marriages, Roy Campanella and Nikki Giovanni. So the evidence is still here. Now, if you want to call Governor Cuomo cousin Cuomo, he's in a poor position to object. So much of the change came about that. You will always find the greatest laws against mixing where the greatest amount of mixing has already occurred. The American South and in South Africa. Where the greatest amount of mixing has already occurred, you will find the greatest laws against it. And the laws are to keep you from realizing the kind of education you need to survive and to face reality, and to what extent other ethnic groups have gotten their financial start preying on the black community. Sent their children to Harvard, taught them how to look down their nose at us. And the initial money that sent them to Harvard came from running a bar in the black community, or selling vegetables in the black community. While we have educated ourselves a lot through struggle, we have not converted the struggle into an instrument of liberation, because we celebrate victory without analyzing victory. The civil rights movement could survive even today if we understood that it had to have a political force. It had to have a political definition under it to take us from one place to the other. Because the civil rights movement came at an appropriate time in history, but we have not learned the lessons from it we needed to learn. It came at a time of the Caribbean Federation effort, the time of the African freedom independent explosion, and the time that we realized that the American dream was not dreamed for us. The American promise wasn't even made to us. What Marcus Garvey added by way of political education is the acknowledgement that someplace in the world you were sovereign once and will be sovereign again. And when he said, up, you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will, he meant that if one mind can do it, another mind can do it. All you need to produce an automobile is one automobile. Tear that one down and see how it was made and build one of your own. This is the kind of knowledge that has to come out of struggle, and when you have to innovate on it. I have said that 200 years ago the Japanese did not have a good wheelbarrow. No one is repudiated. Look at them now. They learned what they had to learn, but the one thing they held on to that we lost a great deal of, a sense of themselves as part of the totality of the culture of the world. But with us, they changed our religion, changed our method to worship. 2 atomic bombs thrown on Japan did not change their religious concept one iota, and did not destroy their self-esteem. Because he said in many ways to the Americans, if I wasn't successful in kicking your behind militarily, I'm going to kick it economically. They lost the battle and won the war. They're better off now than they ever were, and still advancing. Why can't we learn that the higher education of struggle is the rehearsal for nationhood? And if you rehearse for nationhood by being the master of your own community. If we are a billion people on the face of the earth, we and the Chinese, the only one who can boast of a billion, including all the untouchables in India, now saying that we're your brothers. Everybody want to come back to the brotherhood now. The Dravidians in India, 10 million, 100 million untouchables. So we're picking up populations all the time. The people in the Solomon Islands, all New Guinea, all of it, Africa. Between the Caribbean islands, South America, and the United States, you got maybe 250 million people. 500 million in Africa. I suppose we say, I will wear no shoes except the shoes made by an African person. Not only it must be made by an African, but the leather must come from an African cow. I will not be buried in a coffin. I want to be buried in a coffin made of African mahogany. Don't bring me no other mahogany except that it comes out of Africa. We'd have to open up coffin factories. Have to take the industry away from the mafia. Suppose we decide that we're going to behave among ourselves with dignity and respect. Stop cutting up each other. Stop taking from each other. You won't put a whole lot of people out of job. Maintain you in prison is an industry that adds to the economy of the United States. Just make the decision to stay out of jail. How many guards do they need to guard an empty prison? If we could just understand the basic point that Marcus Garvey had, Du Bois had the same point from a high intellectual point of view that wasn't coming over, not even to most of his intellects. But Du Bois was wise enough to discover, after creating a concept of the talented tenth, that the talented tenth had no talent except to imitate white people. Now you can see, through struggle and through understanding, Du Bois' drift towards socialism. A very logical drift. But Marcus Garvey would introduce to us a concept originally coming from the Caribbeans that we had forgotten. And that is the concept of nation. And so in the building of the largest black movement before us since, he tried to get the concept of nation across. And after Marcus Garvey, the concept of nation did not disappear. He went to Jamaica and failed the second time. And if he was alive in Jamaica today, he would still fail because the political atmosphere to support him is not there. I read of a press conference that Marcus Garvey agreed to, and I might have told you this before, but it's worth something in the Jamaica of today. He had tried, ran for office once, and the middle class blocked him the second time. Middle class was the light brigade, meaning those Jamaicans who were children of the white. They're still in Jamaica, they're still entrenched. They're still as color conscious as ever, only now they're willing to lie about it. Now, at this press conference, he's leaving Jamaica, going to England. He'll never see Jamaica again, except for brief visits with his second wife. What do you want to say now that you are leaving Jamaica? He said, yes, come on, get your pencil out. Make a statement. They all pause their pencils on their notebooks. Marcus Garvey said, one sentence: Jamaica is a ridiculous country. Marcus Garvey was addressing himself to is a situation that we have not dealt with today. The situation of fragmentation based on color gradations. We have faced it. When we see a silly movie like School Days, and I only saw it because I had to review it on Gus Hindenburg's program. We see, technically it's a good movie. You see, the director, Spike Lee, he's bringing up a lot of themes. He resolves only one theme. He never resolved the South African theme. He never resolves the fraternity and sorority theme. He never balances this whole thing off. Had there been somebody in that movie said that while they were talking about sorority, it's all garbage because after all, the Greeks had no fraternities until they came in touch with the Africans. That's where they stole it from. Had one character saying that all of this is garbage. We're wasting our time. We could be learning how to build a nation. And we're arguing about the AKAs and the Deltas and the Phi Kappa Samples. All of which started back in Africa. Suppose someone said, take it back to its African base and make it serve African people. Why did he bring up the problem of color without someone counteract, not only disagreeing with, but saying how the colors came into being, in as much as we arrived here all black? Who started the intrusion? Who made the midnight walks? This is illustrated by Henrik Christoph's encounter with a mulatto named Patton. He had one side of Haiti, and he was practicing democracy. Everybody was starving. Christophe was a bold dictator. Everybody was being fed, and everybody was working. Patton faced him one day, knowing Christophe was a former stable boy and the head waiter at the French Inn. And he said, had the French dealt with you as severely as they deal with other slaves, I wouldn't have you to contend with. And then the cutting blow, and Christophe turned to Patton and said, if your grandmother had the decency to keep Frenchmen out of her bed, I wouldn't have you to contend with. Now this is cruel, and it's unfair, because some of our finest patriarchs have come from this class, and some of our best cop-outs have come from this class too. And some of our patriarchs have been jet black, and some of our cop-outs have been jet black. Well, look at Roy Innes. You have no problem of identifying his Africanness, but you have a problem identifying his commitment to black people. He's a black conservative with nothing to conserve but his chain in his slave state. My main point in trying to conclude is that we might have to practice the method of the Sankofa bird. We might have to look back at the past in order to understand the present and the future. Sonus Redding, who died only a few months ago, said in a speech that culture is the mainstay of a people. Heritage is the thing that stimulates a people's honest effort, and that a people must relate to their history in order to relate to the world and to relate to themselves. Finally, he said, the relationship of a people to their history is the same thing as the relationship of a child to his mother's breast. And when you're away from your history, alien from your history, And you have not been nurtured to the point where you can be whole again. You have not analyzed your enemy to understand that many times the oppressor is weaker than you are and fighting too. You have lived an illusion, and these illusions have been disproven in history. You have not looked at these examples. When the Vandals invaded North Africa, there was a rumor going around that the Romans were invincible and no one would dare bring an army against these mighty Romans. The fortunate circumstance of the Vandals that they not only didn't read Roman propaganda, they couldn't read anyway. Moved in and kicked the hell out of the Romans and established themselves, and the Roman Empire wasn't the same since. It would cost almost another 200 years on its old reputation. But the Vandals put an end to the idea that the Roman was invincible. We are crouched in a concept that our enemy is invincible. We look at all this accumulation of chemistry. He can blow up the world. All this accumulation of iron. All kinds of tanks. We forget that to a great extent, heavy weaponry warfare is obsolete.
Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange